Officer Miles Carter seemed to be on a trajectory destined for success. At just 29 years old, he had already established a strong reputation within the Detroit Police Department. Known for his relentless ambition and dependable work ethic, Miles quickly climbed the ranks, earning admiration from both his colleagues and superiors. While his dedication to his career was undeniable, Miles privately struggled with a feeling of emptiness in his personal life. His focus on work had left little room for thoughts of settling down, which always seemed like a far-off idea. That all changed on a summer evening in 2014 when he attended a city gala. The event, attended by politicians, business leaders, and other public servants, introduced him to Tasha Simmons, a 32-year-old event planner. Tasha had built her career from the ground up, becoming one of Detroit's most in-demand coordinators. Her confidence was magnetic, and her poised charm made her unforgettable in any crowd. From the moment Miles spotted her, he was drawn to her presence. A brief exchange of words quickly turned into an extended conversation, and by the end of the night, Miles knew he had met someone extraordinary. In the weeks that followed, their relationship grew rapidly. Tasha's vibrant and dynamic personality brought a spark of excitement to Miles's otherwise regimented life. They spent nearly every evening together, enjoying dinners at Detroit's finest restaurants or sharing quiet nights in her downtown apartment. Their connection felt effortless, and Miles soon found himself imagining a future with her, a future that seemed far brighter with her in it. By early 2015, they decided to take their relationship to the next level and moved in together. Their romance became the talk of their social circles. Miles's co-workers remarked on how much happier and more relaxed he seemed, while Tasha's friends admired the stability and dependability Miles brought into her life. Their whirlwind romance had all the elements of a fairy tale. In June of that year, just 6 months after meeting, Miles proposed to Tasha during a sunset walk on Belle Isle, with Detroit's skyline as a picturesque backdrop. Tasha said yes, and their engagement was soon announced. Their wedding was a small and intimate gathering later that fall, attended by close friends and family. The ceremony, held at an elegant downtown venue, reflected both Miles's reserved nature and Tasha's professional flair. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect couple. Successful, deeply in love, and with a bright future ahead. Tasha continued to thrive in her event planning career, while Miles was on track for a promotion at the department. However, behind the polished exterior of their seemingly ideal marriage, subtle cracks began to form. At first, the signs were barely noticeable. Tasha occasionally seemed distracted, and the energy and warmth that once defined her personality began to fade. Miles noticed the change, but attributed it to work-related stress or the normal adjustments of newlywed life. After all, they had only been married a few months. Trusting that things would naturally settle, he avoided pressing her for explanations. But as the months rolled on into late 2015, those small changes became harder to ignore. It began with Tasha taking phone calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones whenever Miles was nearby. When he asked who was calling, she would smile and brush it off, saying it was work-related and unimportant. Then came her mood swings. Some days she was affectionate and loving, but on others, she seemed distant, lost in thought. Whenever Miles tried to comfort her or ask what was bothering her, she would offer vague answers or quickly change the subject. As an officer, Miles's sharp instincts often helped him read people and situations before they unfolded, but at home, his love for Tasha clouded that intuition. He couldn't bring himself to believe that anything serious was wrong. They had only been married a few months, and the idea of trouble in their relationship seemed premature, almost irrational. When Tasha dismissed his concerns with a laugh or a kiss, Miles let it go, convincing himself it was all part of the natural adjustments of married life. By the summer of 2016, however, Tasha's behavior had become too troubling to ignore. Her phone calls became more frequent, and her reasons for leaving the house grew increasingly vague. She often mentioned late-night meetings with clients or last-minute emergencies that kept her out for hours. Sometimes she would return home late at night, her face tense and her mood irritable. When Miles asked what was wrong, her answers were always the same. Just work. It's been a long day. As her absences stretched longer, Miles's unease deepened. Tasha's explanations for her whereabouts became harder to believe. When he pressed for details, such as where the meetings were or who they were with, her answers grew evasive. The emotional and physical distance between them widened. The intimacy that had once been the cornerstone of their relationship became rare, replaced by an unspoken tension that neither seemed capable of addressing. Miles's mind raced with possibilities. At first, he chalked it up to the stress of her career. As a highly sought-after event planner, Tasha was constantly under pressure to meet her clients' demands. But this explanation felt inadequate. The tension between them felt far too personal to be attributed solely to professional stress. Slowly, a darker suspicion crept into his thoughts. Could Tasha be involved with someone else? The mere idea of infidelity was a bitter pill to swallow, but Miles couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. Determined to uncover the truth, Miles began paying closer attention to her actions. He took note of the time she left the house and how long she was gone. When the opportunity arose, he checked her phone, scrolling through her call logs and messages, but found nothing suspicious. Yet his gut told him there was more to the story than Tasha was letting on. The tension in their home became unbearable. Every unanswered question widened the emotional distance between them. Tasha seemed to sense Miles's growing suspicion, but instead of offering reassurance, she became more defensive. She would lash out, accusing him of not trusting her. And the openness that had once been the foundation of their relationship was replaced by frustration and mistrust. By the end of summer 2016, the situation had spiraled to a breaking point. Miles was convinced something was seriously wrong. Miles Carter could sense that something was wrong, but he still couldn't pinpoint what it was. Every time he tried to address his concerns with Tasha, she either became defensive or outright refused to talk. The confident and successful event planner who had enchanted him at the city gala now felt like a distant memory. In her place was a woman he barely recognized, someone whose secrets were slowly dismantling the life they had built together. By late August of 2016, the change in Tasha's demeanor was undeniable. The once self-assured and vibrant woman Miles had fallen in love with was now visibly anxious. Her lively energy had been replaced by a tense, nervous aura that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Tasha had become increasingly withdrawn, and her presence, once full of life, now felt distant and disconnected. Miles noticed it in her wary glances, in the way she tensed at sudden noises, and in how she clutched her phone tightly, as though protecting something. He could see the weight of whatever was troubling her, but every time he tried to ask, Tasha would deflect, brushing off his concerns with vague reassurances that everything was fine. But nothing was fine. The source of Tasha's anxiety became clear soon enough. Marcus Dixon, a man from her past, had resurfaced. Marcus wasn't just an ordinary figure from her life. He was a link to a period Tasha had spent years trying to forget. Before she met Miles, before she meticulously built her successful and polished image, Tasha had been involved in a world she was desperate to leave behind. Marcus, a petty criminal with a history of small-time thefts and extortion, was part of that world. Tasha had cut ties with those people and rebuilt herself, crafting a respectable and clean life. But Marcus had uncovered her secret, and he saw an opportunity. Marcus knew about Tasha's past, the dangerous choices she had made and the lies she had told to create her current life. Always an opportunist, he decided to exploit this knowledge for his gain. He saw her success and stability as a chance to profit quickly, and Tasha became his next target. It all began with a phone call. One evening, while Tasha was home alone, her phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about it filled her with dread. When she answered, the voice on the other end sent a chill down her spine. It was Marcus. Calm yet calculating, he wasted no time. He told her he knew everything about her past, about the lies she had told, and about the life she had tried so hard to leave behind. Marcus threatened to expose everything to Miles unless she paid him $50,000. He would tell Miles about her old life, about the secrets she had buried so deeply. Tasha was stunned, paralyzed with fear. She had worked so hard to build a new life, one free of the mistakes of her past. Now, it was all on the verge of unraveling. The amount Marcus demanded was impossible. Her event planning career was lucrative, but it didn't provide the kind of money needed to meet his demands at a moment's notice. But Marcus didn't care about her excuses. If she didn't pay, he vowed to ruin her. Desperate to keep her past hidden and her life intact, Tasha reluctantly agreed to meet Marcus in secret. She couldn't bring herself to tell Miles. Not now. Not when the risk of losing him felt too great. She began scraping together money wherever she could. Tasha dipped into her business accounts, took out small loans, and even drained her personal savings. But no matter how much she managed to gather, it was never enough. Marcus was relentless, showing up without warning to demand more. Each time he threatened to reveal her secrets if she didn't comply. The pressure mounted with every meeting. Tasha's financial situation became increasingly dire, and Marcus seemed to thrive on the control he held over her. Their clandestine meetings were always in shadowy locations, dim parking lots, quiet streets, or abandoned alleys, places where they wouldn't be seen. Tasha lived in constant fear that someone, especially Miles, would find out. Every encounter with Marcus made her feel more trapped, the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in tighter with each passing day. The strain of these encounters began to take a visible toll. Tasha's once composed and polished demeanor started to crumble. She was plagued by sleepless nights, and her ability to maintain the illusion of control was slipping. By the fall of 2016, her erratic behavior had become impossible for Miles to ignore. The small changes in her personality, which he had initially dismissed, had now become glaringly obvious. The lively and warm Tasha he knew had been replaced by someone anxious and distracted. She was often absent, giving vague excuses about her whereabouts, and the connection they had once shared seemed to vanish entirely. At first, Miles tried to rationalize her behavior. He told himself that her career as an event planner must have become more demanding than usual, perhaps because of a particularly difficult client or a high-stakes project. But as her absences grew more frequent, her explanations less believable, and the emotional distance between them more pronounced, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much deeper was wrong. Miles's instincts, honed by years in law enforcement, told him Tasha was hiding something. The most plausible explanation to him was an affair. It was a thought he didn't want to entertain, but the signs seemed undeniable. The secretive phone calls, late-night outings, and tension that followed her whenever she returned home all pointed to the same conclusion. The possibility gnawed at him, slowly eroding the trust he had placed in her. Each vague excuse and dismissive response only deepened his suspicion. Determined to uncover the truth, Miles decided to take matters into his own hands. One evening, when Tasha told him she had a client meeting, Miles followed her. It was something he had never imagined doing, but the growing weight of doubt left him no choice. He needed answers, even if they destroyed him. As Tasha left their home, Miles tailed her car. Every turn she made heightened his anxiety. Eventually, she pulled into a poorly lit parking lot on the outskirts of the city, a strange location for a professional meeting. Miles parked at a distance and watched as she got out of her car, nervously glancing around. Minutes later, another car pulled in and a man stepped out. Although Miles couldn't make out the man's face clearly, he saw enough. Tasha approached the man, and after a brief exchange, she handed him an envelope. The interaction was quick, but tense. Tasha's body language was rigid, her expression anxious. After the man walked away, she stood motionless for a moment before hurrying back to her car. Miles sat frozen, stunned by what he had just witnessed. The scene was like something out of a bad movie, a secretive meeting in the shadows, an envelope exchanged under cover of darkness. To him, it was confirmation of his worst fear. Tasha was having an affair. The unexplained absences, the secretive behavior, the tension, it all seemed to point in the same direction. The realization hit him like a blow, leaving him reeling. As he replayed the events of the past months in his mind, every unexplained moment, every cold interaction now seemed like undeniable evidence of her betrayal. When Tasha returned home, Miles's suspicions were no longer just doubts. They were a crushing certainty. Later that evening, Miles was waiting for Tasha, his emotions barely restrained. His voice shook with a mixture of anger and pain as he confronted her. "Who is he?" he demanded. "What's going on? I saw you meeting with that man tonight. What are you hiding?" Tasha's eyes widened. But instead of reacting with guilt or shame as Miles had anticipated, she remained calm. She told him it was a work matter, claiming the envelope contained contracts and documents related to her event planning business. She explained that the man was a colleague, someone she had been collaborating with on a challenging project. Her explanation was so composed that it almost made Miles doubt what he had seen. Yet, his instincts wouldn't let him believe her. Every word felt rehearsed, her answers too polished, too convenient. As a police officer, Miles had learned to trust his gut, and right now it was telling him that something was off. Instead of easing his concerns, Tasha's explanation only deepened his suspicions. Sensing Miles's growing mistrust, Tasha became even more withdrawn. The tension between them grew unbearable, and neither of them seemed willing or able to confront the underlying issues. Their once loving relationship had devolved into a battlefield of suspicion and avoidance, with both sides refusing to address the truth head-on. One particularly taxing day at work, Miles came home late, burdened by the pressures of his job and the unease that had invaded his home life. The day had been filled with the usual stress of police work, but the tension with Tasha had begun to affect every aspect of his life. Exhausted in every way, Miles entered the house and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Tasha was sitting at the kitchen table, but barely acknowledged him when he walked in. Her distant expression and the suffocating silence only added to his frustration. Determined to finally uncover the truth, Miles waited for the right moment. When Tasha excused herself to take a shower, she left her phone on the counter. Normally, he would have respected her privacy, but his desperation overrode his better judgment. His hands trembling slightly, Miles picked up her phone and began scrolling through her messages. What he found wasn't what he had been expecting. There were no messages from a secret lover, no hidden conversations confirming his fears of an affair. Instead, he discovered a chilling exchange with a man named Marcus Dixon. The texts revealed the blackmail that had been tormenting Tasha for months. Marcus was demanding $50,000 in exchange for keeping quiet about a dark chapter from Tasha's past, a secret she had never shared with Miles. The messages were filled with threats, making it clear that if Tasha didn't pay, Marcus would expose everything to her husband. Miles's heart sank. This wasn't infidelity. It was something far worse. The woman he had built his life with, the one he had trusted completely, had been lying to him from the very beginning. She had concealed a massive secret, one that now threatened to destroy everything they had. The simmering anger he had been holding back for months boiled over. When Tasha came back into the room, she immediately knew something was wrong. Miles stood motionless, pale-faced and fists clenched, her phone still in his hand. Her eyes widened with fear as she realized what had happened. "Miles, I can explain," she stammered, taking cautious steps toward him. "It's not what you think." But Miles cut her off, his voice trembling with fury. "You've been lying to me this entire time," he shouted. "You let him blackmail you? Why didn't you tell me?" Tasha, now visibly shaken, tried to explain, but her words came out fragmented and frantic. She told him she had wanted to protect him and their life together. She had been terrified of losing him, of losing everything they had built. But every attempt at justification only made things worse. The pressure from Marcus and the weight of her secrets had left Tasha fragile, and now that everything was out in the open, she felt cornered and helpless. In a moment of blind rage, Miles acted without thinking. Before he even realized what he was doing, he struck Tasha. The force of the blow caught her off guard, causing her to stumble backward. As she tried to steady herself, she lost her balance and fell, her head striking the sharp edge of the kitchen table. The sickening sound of the impact echoed through the room, and for a moment, everything went silent. Miles froze, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Tasha lay motionless on the floor, her body limp, blood pooling beneath her head. The reality of what he had done hit him like a tidal wave. He had gone too far. The anger that had consumed him had led to an irreversible act of violence. Panic overtook him as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Tasha," he called out, his voice shaking. "Tasha, "Wake up, please." But it was too late. The woman he loved, the woman he had promised to protect, was gone. The weight of what he had done bore down on him, suffocating him. Miles's mind raced with a flood of emotions: disbelief, guilt, and horror. This wasn't supposed to happen. Without thinking, driven entirely by fear and instinct, he scrambled to decide his next move. His mind blank and his heart pounding, Miles grabbed his car keys, desperate to figure out what to do next. Miles grabbed his keys and bolted from the house, climbing into his car and speeding away with no clear destination in mind. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm as he drove aimlessly through the darkened streets of Detroit. The city around him blurred into an unrecognizable haze as his mind wrestled with a torrent of emotions: shock, guilt, fear, and disbelief. How had things spiraled so far out of control? The confrontation with Tasha, the woman he had loved so deeply, had taken a turn he never could have anticipated. He had never intended to harm her, but in a single moment of uncontrollable rage, everything had shattered. Now, all that remained was the inescapable reality of a tragedy that could never be undone. As Miles continued driving, his phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls and messages, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. He knew it was only a matter of time before the police came looking for him. He understood there was no escaping the consequences of his actions, yet all he could do for now was drive, the darkness outside mirroring the turmoil raging within him. Meanwhile, Marcus Dixon, the man whose threats had set this devastating series of events into motion, watched from the shadows. For months, he had manipulated Tasha, wielding his blackmail and threats like weapons. Upon learning of her death, Marcus seized the opportunity to disappear, leaving behind the chaos he had orchestrated. Taking the money Tasha had painstakingly gathered, he vanished without a trace, leaving Miles to bear the consequences of everything that had unfolded. The next morning, the grim scene at Miles and Tasha's home was discovered. A neighbor, concerned by the unusual silence from the house, knocked on the door. When there was no answer, she peered through a window and saw Tasha's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. Horrified, she immediately called the police. Authorities arrived within minutes, quickly assessing the situation. Tasha's injuries combined with Miles's absence pointed directly to him as the prime suspect. News of the incident spread rapidly, shocking those who knew Miles. Within the Detroit Police Department, where Miles had been a rising star, disbelief rippled through his colleagues. Officer Miles Carter, a respected and ambitious young officer with a bright future ahead, was now at the center of a murder investigation. For several days, Miles remained on the run, driving aimlessly through the city without direction or purpose. The weight of what he had done grew heavier with each passing hour. He knew he couldn't evade accountability forever. Eventually, completely broken and drained, Miles surrendered. Pale and haggard, he walked into a police station and confessed to everything. The trial that followed captivated the nation, with the tragic tale of betrayal, secrets, and violence dominating headlines. Every detail of Miles and Tasha's life was laid bare, dissected in the courtroom and in the public eye. Prosecutors painted Miles as a man consumed by jealousy and paranoia, arguing that his growing suspicion of Tasha's behavior had culminated in her death. They emphasized the violent confrontation as evidence of premeditation. Witness testimony revealed the unraveling of Miles and Tasha's marriage, shedding light on Tasha's hidden past, the blackmail from Marcus, and the burden of the secrets she had carried. The courtroom was steeped in tension as these revelations unfolded, leaving no aspect of their lives untouched. The public, too, was divided. Some sympathized with Miles, seeing him as a man pushed to the brink by desperation. Others condemned him as a violent abuser who had ended an innocent life. Ultimately, the jury found Miles guilty of involuntary manslaughter. While it was a devastating verdict, it reflected the complicated nature of the case. The judge acknowledged the emotional and psychological strain that had led to Tasha's death, but could not overlook the fact that Miles had taken her life. He was sentenced to prison, his once promising career in law enforcement reduced to ruins.